Hi everybody, my name is Will Savino. I am a composer and a sound designer based in Lansing, Michigan. I have been brought here to IU thanks to Regin and Gamedev at IU to talk to you all about sound design specifically and how game designers can use sound design, how they can create it, and how they can do all of that without knowing anything. I know some of you do know a little bit about sound design already. I'm going to assume that you don't, and I'm going to assume you have zero money. Oh, can we close that door because I can hear myself through the, or turn off that monitor that's in the other room? Sorry, that's really distracting. I'm going to assume you have no money. I'm going to assume you have no pre-knowledge, and I'm going to assume that you don't even have good instincts about audio. And I'm going to tell you how you can hopefully make really great sound design based off of only that. If you have no desire to ever do sound design in any capacity, that's also fine, because as a game designer, I think it's very worth knowing the process that a sound designer goes through so that you can help that person to create the sound design for your game if you've hired them or if you're working alongside them, and give them feedback in a way that can help them to cater the audio for your project. Okay, so a little bit about myself and why you might find it worthwhile to listen to me today. I have a master's in music composition from Michigan State. Before that, I got a bachelor's in music and economics from Amherst College. You can see on the screen some of the projects and the teams I've worked with. You can see here, I've in the past less than 2 years, I have used Reaper for 2,300 hours almost. So I spend a lot of time doing this. I've had games on mobile and on browser and on Switch and on Steam and all over. I've also worked for TV and musical theater and podcasts, and I am a digital millennial, so I have a Patreon. I'm all over the place. I do a little bit of everything. Dozens of games. I have worked in both music and I say SFX, I really mean the sort of like broad, nebulous world that we refer to as sound design. And I also have no money, so hopefully this will be relatable to you as college students on how you can do all of this on a budget. To prove my point, this is my studio. Massive air quotes there. This is my studio. I have some instruments. I have very poor minimal soundproofing. You can't see it, but there is a blanket that is nailed to my ceiling that my landlord does not know about. I have very average speakers. This is also sort of Inception-y because you can see that I'm working on this slide in this slide. I like that. I got a pretty average mic. It's not that great, and it is plenty. I've worked on plenty of commercial products, and I'm telling you right now, this setup with my PC that I built and my computer chair that I stole from my university, that this is plenty. This is all you need. So trust me. Okay, so what the heck are we actually talking about when we talk about sound design? It's sort of a misleading phrase. Usually when we refer to it in gaming, in my experience, we're not talking about music, although the overlap is sometimes hard to draw a distinction between what is music and what is sound design, and why we even make the distinction sometimes falls apart. The first thing we're talking about is what I refer to sort of specifically as SFX, sound effects. These are sounds that might get triggered in your game based off of the actions of the player, based off things that you know are going to happen in a cutscene. These are discrete sounds that happen once and have a length, and then they stop most of the time. These are split up between diegetic and non-diegetic sounds very generally. Diegetic basically means a sound that you would expect to logically actually happen in the world that you are interacting with. If you see a telephone in the game and that telephone rings, that's a diegetic sound. You would expect that telephone to ring. That's a sound that makes sense. Non-diegetic sounds are sounds that are maybe evocative, maybe sounds that imply something about the action or the ambience, sounds that wouldn't really happen in the world, but we're just saying this is a sound that we're applying here. Music that happens on top of a scene would be considered non-diegetic sound, but also things, you know, something like, what is the sound of someone jumping? there is no sound of someone jumping. There's a sound of people landing as your footsteps hit the ground, but silence on the release mostly, right? But we all know that jumping makes a sound, right? In video games. That's sort of a non-diegetic sound. It's not a logical sound, but we use it to imply something. And then we also have UI sounds. These, again, can sort of fit into this gray area. Does a UI make a sound? Well, a UI is not like a thing that we encounter in the real world, except in technologically mediated situations. But there are so many sounds of like button hover, button click. Every game I've worked on, I've had to make something called button underscore hover .mp3 or .ogg, and it's just this concept of when your mouse is over something, that must make a sound. Why? I don't know. But the point is we need to give feedback to what the player is doing. If the player is interacting with our systems, even if that system is just a menu, we need to, in some way, tell them, yes, you are doing a thing. I assure you, your actions have consequences. I tend to classify ambiences as a separate category of sounds in general. Ambiences are anything that is setting the tone of an area. The purpose of an ambience is almost always to create mood and to create a sense of space. If you have a game and it's first person and you walk into a factory area, there might be some very specific SFX that happen in that factory. If you see a man hitting a hammer against a rock, I don't know what happens in factories, that would be a sound that you would hear. But you might also just have an ambience sound that plays nonstop throughout that factory. You can create that in a lot of different ways. If you're using middleware, which is something I'll talk about later, you might create a really cool sort of like pseudo procedurally generated soundscape where you're sort of like pulling from a grab bag of sounds and playing them back at random. Or you can do what I usually do, which is much simpler from an implementation standpoint, and just record a 45-second loop of like a bunch of drill sounds and motors whirring, and then loop that. And then it almost becomes this other sort of like music track. It's this constant thing that's getting layered in amongst everything else that is creating space and setting mood. Something we often don't think about with regard to sound design is voiceover. Voices are not just the responsibility of the voice actors. If your game has voice acting and you are the sound designer on that game, it will be your responsibility to make sure that those voices are recorded, that they are mixed, and that they're implemented in a way that works for the rest of the game. I'm sure at least some of you have played some indie Russian title where every bit of voice acting is poorly performed, is recorded on a different microphone, sounds like it's coming out of a speaker even though it's in your game. That is, of course, most of the time the fault of low budgets, reaching out to random voice talent on Twitter. But that falls in the realm of sound design, and if you are a professional, there are things you can do with that to make it work better. And lastly, part of sound design is implementation. The way that sounds are placed into a game, and the way that they're triggered, and the way that they play back, and any processing that happens as part of that implementation is the responsibility generally of the sound team that is working on a game. If you are working on an indie project and you are a sound designer, or if you're a solo dev doing everything, the implementation is very likely going to be your responsibility. And it's not something that you can take for granted. It's something that I'll probably say a few times during this talk, but sound is only as good as the last step in the chain. You can record a really good sound, but if it plays back at the wrong time, if it plays back at the wrong bit rate and sounds all distorted, if it stutters, if it just never loads properly, it doesn't matter how good that original recording was, it's going to sound awful. And just to show you a little bit of just how good sound can be and why it is so important, I'm just going to show a quick clip from a recent review of Elite Dangerous, which focuses specifically on the sound design. That's not where, sorry.
Visuals set a really high bar, but here's the thing. The game sounds even better.
4, 3, 2, 1.
This is one of the best sounding games I've ever played. The quality of the sound, the variety, the mixing.
I totally agree. This is I'm gonna put that away. The sound is fabulous. Some things I like about that are the fact that there is really great processing going on in game. I don't know anything about how the sound was made for Elite Dangerous, but to me it sounds like when there are certain sounds that are played very loudly and should be the priority, such as when you crash into that other ship or whatever it was that happened, the other sounds in the scene become quieter. There is only one way to do that, and it's not when you're recording the sounds. You have to be implementing that in real time because you don't know when the player is going to crash their ship, right? So there's some sort of compression going on there, or ducking, or just levels changing in some way or another. The UI is integrated into the sound design. You can hear the flickering as the heads-up display on your ship is changing. There is really awesome filtering going on when there's that like bomb explosion in the asteroid field. So much of this is working to reinforce that the player's actions are doing things and that this is a real lived-in space. You know, if you had a spaceship, chances are your heads-up display would make a lot of sounds to alert you to what is going on. If if the glass on your ship broke, you would want a voice saying like, "Hey, you got a problem, babe." You know, like this is good because it's telling the player everything they need to know, just on a technical basis, and also telling them how they should feel and telling them that what they're doing is actually doing things. Does that make sense? Cool. And feel free to cut me off at any time if you guys have questions. You know, I have this thing made, but I'd much rather cater this to you guys and your questions and interests and whatnot. Okay, so where does sound design come from? Well, most of the time it comes from other people. For the majority of people in game design, you're just not going to work on sound design and you're going to rely on other people to do it. If you are trying to find people, Twitter is the best place to find anyone in most gaming fields, especially in indie gaming. But you can also Sound Lister is a site that I know some people use, and you can reach out to other people in any number of ways. There are so many sound designers that would be eager to work on your game. And please support them in any way that you can. And I don't just mean that monetarily, although I do mean it monetarily. I also mean give your sound designers builds of your game. Send them reference tracks. When I was here last year, all I did was talk about how you can support composers that you're working with. Happy to talk about this more if you're more thinking about like never working on sound design and instead helping them out. There are a lot of things you can do to make sure that your sound designer is going to give you the best product that you want. A lot of sound design can just come from libraries that you buy. A lot of the sounds that you slap into your game, you could just buy a pack that is like a zip file of explosion sounds and drag and drop them into the parts of your project where you're going to need it. Never buy these full price. Absolutely everything in the realm of sound software goes on sale, period. Everything goes on sale. I have spent so much money on audio plugins and on sound libraries, and I haven't bought anything ever fully priced. This Cyber Week sale, that $14 thing, I bought that. That was 700 gigabytes. I haven't even started downloading it yet. So don't buy things full price. And also, you guys are broke for the sake of this talk, and also maybe in real life also. So you guys are going to have to do sound design yourself. So how is that going to work? How do you make sounds? What is the process here? Well, here are the basics. I'll talk about this a little bit, and then I'll show you some examples so that this all isn't in the abstract. The first thing you have to do might be a bit unintuitive, but before you start making sound design, you have to decide what sounds you actually have to make. In film and also sometimes in gaming, this is called spotting. Basically going through your project and looking at what is happening and saying, okay, I know in this scene a character's going to walk in. Let's see, there's a telephone there. We'll need to have a ring sound for that. Oh, he's walking. Do we need footsteps? Well, we could go either way with that. You know, there has to be some process whereby you decide what can have sounds and then whittle it down to what needs to have sounds. This is often going to become an issue of scope and budget. There's basically no limit to the number of things in a world that can create sounds. but it is hard to make sounds for every single thing. I could do a whole talk just on how you make those decisions, but there are not enough hours in the day. Next is use references. This might be obvious or it might not, but 99.9% of the sounds you are going to make, someone else has had to make a similar type sound for a project they've worked on. A game, a film, whatever. If your character needs a jump sound, you have a wealth of options to check out. And you might learn something different from all of them, right? You know that Mario's jump is like a really sort of like gradual synthy slide, the 8-bit version. Sonic's has more of a sort of like springy sound to it. They both have an upward inflection. We could do a lot of examination as to why that would be. But just having those two counterpoints as like, how are these different? What can I learn from them? Why do players like these sounds? Why do players like these games that have these sounds? It's a great place to start, especially with stuff that's non-diegetic. Like, what does a jump sound like? I have no idea, right? We just have this sort of like culturally ingrained idea that a jump has to have a sound because we need to give players feedback, right? Feel free to just drag and drop these into your project and copy them one for one. If you can do it, just as an exercise, like if you can recreate a sound, you shouldn't use it because you've just totally copied it. But that exercise in and of itself, just getting to the same point, is really useful to just sort of like work on your sound design chops. Next is just use Google. Here's an example. Some sound design things seem really difficult to make until you realize that in the 100+ years of recording history, we've gotten really good at them. How would you record fire in the field? You could start a bonfire and like very carefully take a mic to it and like drag a cord back to your computer. But that sounds like dangerous and difficult and not at all easy. Does anybody know the way that most sound design-y fire is made? It's going to sound obvious when I say it, and you would never guess it. It's a mix of two things. Cracking sticks to get the crackling sound, like literally just take a single stick and crack it a bunch of times and then layer it. And then tinfoil. If you just put tinfoil up to a mic and just kind of like smush it around, instant fire. I don't know why. If you'd asked me to if you played a sound of tinfoil crinkling, I would never tell you it's tinfoil crinkling. I would say that is fire because it's just so. But you'd never know that unless you Googled it. So just Google and imitate whatever you can find because you'll still do something that is different and noteworthy. Layering is the way to do everything. The amount of sounds that I've successfully made for a game that consists of just a single layer where I just got it, I just did like a recording and it's just a perfect single recording. Basically never. I mean, basically never. Maybe for maybe for voiceover, that's just about it. But if you combine sounds, if you have a library of just free sounds and just combine them in weird combinations, you're going to make something that is unique, just like combinatorially. Someone else did not combine those three sounds in the same way as you. And it's also going to be fuller, and it's also going to be more interesting. The more things you can pile on, if mixed properly, you're going to get a richer, more interesting sound. Now there are limits. If you just pile on sounds enough, you end up with basically white noise if you just keep compressing it down to fit within. Anyway, there's a limit, but in general, if you can combine the components of what you want from a sound, you can get it through layering. Next might be counterintuitive, especially for those of you who don't have any like acting or theater background, but your voice is by far the most complex instrument you will ever have access to. More than a piano or a guitar or a Chapman stick, whatever you can come up with, your voice can do more things than all of the other instruments combined. You will be embarrassed. You will feel stupid going into your mic to do sounds with your voice, but nobody will know it's your voice most of the time because there will be so much processing on it to achieve whatever effect you're going to have. Here's a good example. In almost every game that I've sound designed, I've needed to do some sort of whoosh, just some sort of whoosh. Maybe it's like a dash, maybe it's like flipping through a UI. Every time I start the same way. I just go to my mic and just go, whoosh, and that sounded bad there, right? But with enough processing, and if you automate your EQ and you have some like volume automation and you throw on some compression and whatnot, you can get, if that is your starting point, if you just imitate the sound that you want, most of the time it's a great starting point. Okay, so here are the main 4 tools you're going to use within your software that you're using to edit your audio. All of these you will have for free no matter what software you are using. And this, for me, is most of the processing I do. I have other effects that I use, of course, but this is like, these are the heavy hitters, and they're also the sort of most fundamental audio editing tools you have at your disposal. One is EQ, short for equalization. This is the tool that you use to determine the proportional loudness of different parts of the frequency range. If you want things to have more low end, more bassy, you can give it a boost there. You can cut it. You can sculpt very interesting shapes. And in this way, you can take even stock sounds and make them sound entirely foreign. You can take your voice, and if you here's an example. I had to do a sort of like sci-fi spaceship engine at like a low rumble. You're in like low orbit. It's just a casual low rumbling. I used my voice. I used some layers. I've literally used all of these things. And one thing I did was I just went to my mouth and just went. Sounds awful when you do it there. But if you just EQ out a lot of those high frequencies, you're left with this muffled, just sort of constant grinding. You slap some reverb on there, you're halfway there. EQ is magic. It is your way of making sure that all of your sounds are full, that they're occupying the parts of the frequency space that you want them to be occupying. If you're working with bass-heavy music in the background and you need sound effects to still cut through, give it some high frequencies, for example. EQ it's everything. Volume automation. Volume automation is the process of graphing out the different relative volumes of a sound over time. You can do this on a layer by layer basis, and you can do it on a sort of like full sound basis. This is your way of dictating how the sound how much priority the sound gets over time. Here's a great example. Normally when we have explosions in sound design, there's sort of 3 phases of the explosion. There's the initial impact, there's a bit of a lull and a pause in it, and then there is the big sort of crash, the clanging. That could be like maybe, and that can be for different reasons. Maybe it's like you see a missile hit the ground way far away and you hear that impact, but then you have to wait for the sonic boom to hit you, and then there's the crackle there. Or maybe you're up close to the explosion and there's the initial shot, and then there's a pause while you wait for the debris to hit the ground. In either case, it's sort of part of our way of, I don't even know if explosions look like that in the real world. I've never been at an explosion, yeah? But that's our way, that's just like part of the way that we have culturally encoded explosions into the audio world. In order to do that, though, you need a really sharp transient. Transient is like a sharp jump in loudness for that initial impact. So if we're graphing this out, that's a spike here. And then you need a pause, you need a lull so that that next section hits hard for you. So it's going to be spike and then a lull, and then something that lasts a lot longer at a slightly higher volume, not as high as the initial impact, but that lasts longer. It's got some crunch, it's got some crackle. And a big part of that is if you just start with like white noise, basically, you can get halfway there just by doing big spike in volume and then bring it down. If you just trace that graph out and apply it to white noise, you're halfway to an explosion just from that alone. Time stretching. This might seem weirdly niche, but time stretching really has 2 effects. It can make a sound longer or shorter, of course, but time stretching has a secondary effect that's arguably more important. Does anyone know what that is?
That's the artifacting?
Artifacts are definitely an option if you keep the pitch constant as you do time stretching. If you don't keep the pitch constant, then if you take a sound and you play it back slowly, like on a cassette player, you'll notice that the pitch goes down drastically. If you play back, if you play back a cassette really fast, it goes because basically what you're doing is you are compressing all of the waveforms so that their frequency is much higher. The wavelengths are much shorter. This is just impossibly invaluable because it allows you to take basically any sound that you want and play it back at any pitch that you want without any of the weird artifacts from using special pitch processing. So if I'm in a pinch and I need a really low, fat thud sound, worst case scenario, I could go up to my microphone and I could snap. Now, a snap is not a low pitch sound, but if I time stretch that enough, what we'll end up with is a snap that lasts for a really long time, or whatever the inverse of that is. I time stretch constantly. If you just scream like a normal scream and time stretch it, that's a monster. You just made a monster sound in one step. Use it all the time. Never fear. It's great. And reverb. Typically, when we think of reverb, we think of it as a way to take a sound and place it in a realistic space, right? If you just record, if you record a snap in your microphone, it's going to sound super dry if you have proper soundproofing in your room. It's just going to be click and then no other sound. But when I snap in here, it reverberates for a little bit. In games, there are a few ways this can happen. One is you can apply a reverb basically in your engine. So Unity just has like a built-in reverb that in 3D spaces works okay. I don't always like the sound of it, but it works generally well. You can use it to create a sense of space. You can feed it basically dry sound effects that are recorded in a sterile environment and make them sound generally like they're in a real space. However, that's not always possible, and we often want to apply a space ahead of time if we know what space these are going to take place in. So we can apply reverb in the audio editing process. But reverb is a lot more than that, because reverb isn't just about space. It's about, not just about space in terms of making it sound like it's in a real diegetic situation, but it's about creating space and a sound in a 3D sense, right? It's about taking a mono signal, that is a signal that is the same in the left and right channel, and making it sound as though it is wider, or making it sound longer. With creative applications of even the simplest reverb plugin, you are able to take a sound and really transform it in ways that you wouldn't expect and are not simply like one-to-one. Here's what it would sound like if you snapped in a football stadium. And then the next basic is you just got to test everything in game. The amount of times I've made a sound that I knew was good, but that sounds really stupid and weird if you just play it back on your headphones because it's like a third of a second and it's just really short and it's high pitched and it's like, oh God, my client is going to think this is so dumb. You have to say, put it in your game, drag and drop it. Once it's in the context of the ambiences, the other sound effects, the music, once it's reacting to the player feedback, you got some like graphical juice with your shotgun blast, and then you hear it and it's like, oh wow, okay, no, that actually works. Alternatively, you will find that a lot of things are too full or too tinny, whatever. So many things don't work, and you just can't know that in the sort of sterile environment of a digital audio workstation. So put everything in game, it's easy. And this one's maybe the most unintuitive, but you just gotta be a pack rat. I mean, I told you I just bought 700 gigabytes for 15 bucks, but you just gotta, anytime you find a sound, if you record a cool thing, keep it. You never know when it's gonna come in handy. The amount of things I've like reused from past projects and given new life, if you have some weird thing in your studio for some reason, just record it and find a use for it later. And just to prove my point, my samples folder has 55 gigabytes. Most of these are fewer than a second. My plugins folder, which also has my contact libraries, just another 300 gigabytes. And that's just what I keep on my computer. I have so much more stuff that is like I have access to at the ready online. 700 gigabytes, for example. So really, if you can afford the space, just hold on to things. Okay, like I said before, you're on a budget. Here's what you will need in order to actually make this happen. Here's the bare minimum. Obviously, you need a computer. If you're doing game design, you have a computer. I'm just going to assume that. It can be garbage. This is not my computer. This is Richard's computer, but I have my computer somewhere. It is $100. You can do everything you need on that, truly. You're going to need some sort of digital audio workstation. This is software that you use to edit audio, sort of a catch-all term. I will be saying DAW from this point forward because I don't like saying digital audio workstation. But a lot of them are free. Many of you have probably used Audacity before. It's free, but it's a workhorse. It can really do most of the stuff you need, especially for sound design. If all you need to do is like time stretch, change volumes and stuff, this guy will get you through a lot. GarageBand, I got my start in audio production on GarageBand for like the first 8 years of my musical career. I mean, that started in middle school, so you can do the math. But still, GarageBand can do most things. It is hampered by Apple sort of like intentionally keeping you from doing certain things with it. But a DAW is a DAW is the point. Cakewalk's another one people use. Reaper has a big question mark next to it because it's not free. But there's an unlimited trial period with full functionality as long as you sit through like a 5-second ad for itself and aren't making more than like X amount of money per year. So I used Reaper for a long time without paying for it, and then I just paid for it because I'm a professional. Reaper's great. I will be annoying if I talk about it more, but it's my bread and butter. You can really get by with pretty bad headphones and speakers. Audio purists are going to get mad at me for this, but especially if you're just doing this for your game, if you have bad headphones and speakers, but if you use something to analyze the frequency spectrum of your audio on your screen, if you use some sort of frequency spectrum analyzer which shows you whether there's like a ton of bass that you're not hearing because you're listening on whatever crappy earpods you have, you'll get by. You'll survive. I mean, it's not ideal, but it'll work. Here's some helpful stuff. Obviously, you can get better headphones and speakers. That would really help. You can't edit something that you can't hear. Really important. If you don't know that there's a sound, if something is bassy and you want to play with it, but your headphones literally can't replicate that bass, what are you going to do with it? Literally just upgrading to like those $20 over-the-ear Sony headphones is just an absolute game changer over listening on laptop speakers. Just transformative. Microphone. I didn't list microphone in the bare minimum setup because you don't really need a microphone if you can find sounds online. I use a mic all the time when I'm doing sound design. Like 50% of the sound that I use is just things I've done with my mouth or my body. Sounds creepy. I usually just mean like hitting my stomach for thuds and stuff. But a microphone, even a bad one, is going to get you a long way. Paid DAW is better. DAW, again, digital audio workstation. If you have GarageBand, if you can afford it, make the jump to Logic. It is a ginormous step up in quality. But like I said, you can still do everything on the free one. And middleware. Okay. Middleware, I mentioned it before. Middleware is basically additional software that you can use that will allow you to do more intricate things with your audio in terms of implementation. You can basically open up an Fmod project and set parameters to determine how music will loop, what will trigger certain sounds. You can randomize things. You can create a lot of variety. You can create a lot of interesting textures. You can get things that sound like they were like procedurally generated when all you did was like fiddle with a few knobs in Fmod and then sort of tie everything to parameters in Unity or whatever the heck else you're using. It is a bigger can of worms than you might think at first because simply using Fmod basically just looks like any other DAW with a few other bells and whistles. But sometimes hooking that up, if you're the sound designer and there's another person programming everything, you will run into headaches as you try to get on the same page. Speaking from experience, of course. But it's well worth it. There are things that you can do everything in Fmod without Fmod, but it's a lot harder. It's basically the long and short of it. And a MIDI keyboard. Even if you're not using instrument sounds, really, you don't need to be playing piano in your sound design for a MIDI keyboard to be useful. Just being able to automate things with knobs instead of doing it with your keyboard, or if you're using a synth to make a sort of evocative thing. If you're working on a sci-fi game, I can't imagine doing sound design without a MIDI keyboard. It just speeds up your process a lot. It's literally just a keyboard, like a piano type keyboard that you hook up to your computer, and you're able to input a ton of information, just information and use that to tell software on your computer what to do. It's much easier than interfacing with it just with like a typing keyboard alone. And here's stuff that's nice to have that you absolutely don't need if you want to be a sound designer. Third-party audio plugins and sound libraries. There's a whole business of people that will sell you sounds that they've recorded, that will sell you software that you can use to manipulate sounds. It's great, it's helpful, it's awesome, you don't need it. I have a lot of it. I can do so much of what I do without it because, like I said, if you have a mic and if you can time stretch things, you're already halfway there. It's nice to be able to mangle it with like crazy distortions that you bought and all sorts of weird manipulative stuff, but ultimately, in most of my projects, the vast majority of what I'm doing is just recording stuff that I have lying around the house and applying the most basic of effects to it. Portable recorder is great. You can get a Zoom recorder for like $100. If you want to record the sound of a bunch of birds chirping in the woods, you're not gonna grab your laptop and your audio interface and your $400 condenser mic and bring it out there. There's no way to do it without having something that you can cart around and that's all in one. Comes with an SD card, you plug it into your computer, it's great, it's super easy. Again, you don't need it. Foley junk. Foley is a proper definition of Foley. Foley is basically the act of recording everyday items to create sounds. I think that's all it is. Is that what Foley is? That's the definition I've always been going with. By Foley junk, I literally just mean stuff that's in your house, in your apartment, in your studio, whatever, that you can then put in front of a microphone and record. I would not have been able to do any of the sound designs that I've done without my kitchen because I record pots and pans and knives and my sink all the time. Rice is great. Tin foil is great. I keep tin foil in my kitchen. All that stuff is so useful. It is almost always easier to record something like that you just have lying around than it is to like find someone else who has recorded. If you just have it lying around, it takes 2 seconds to turn on your mic. You're done, right? Of course, if you have limited space, this is hard. I understand that. There's so many times where I've wanted to record chains. I don't have like big metal chains lying around, right? And I'm not gonna buy them just to have them for Foley. So, don't be insane. Don't be a hoarder. I did tell you to be a pack rat earlier, but that's like with files. Professional hardware, yeah, a condenser mic is great. It's more expensive. You'll get a better frequency response. It will like pick up high frequencies. It'll pick up transients better. I use basically one condenser mic for almost every recording I do because I can't afford an expensive rig. One will do you. If you have a bunch of stuff, you can get pencil mics and contact mics and all sorts of cool stuff. You get like a Shure 57 or Shure 58, that'll cover most of the things that you need. Studio monitors, really good speakers or headphones. Yeah, great, of course. Soundproofing is either very expensive or very difficult to do well, but if you're recording in a studio, some amount of soundproofing is necessary. I have done a lot. I have a blanket on my ceiling. I have another blanket on one of my walls. I only have like a felt painting. It has unicorns on it. It's beautiful. But there's no limit to how much you can soundproof a room, and it just makes every recording easier because you don't have to remove room tone. In my room, even with everything I've done, there's one frequency that is louder than every others when I record in there because it just resonates for some reason, and I just have to constantly know that is an issue. If I were able to afford to soundproof better, I wouldn't have to confront that with every single recording that I do. Okay, great. So we'll jump. Sorry, I've talked for a lot. Does anyone have questions thus far? Things they want to comment on? Cool, great. I will give you a demonstration of one of my projects, like project files that has some sound design in it later. But for that, I wanted to just use like stock plugins, nothing fancy. Here, I'm going to show you some stuff using other sound libraries and cool plugins. These are just some examples of some sounds that I've done. This first one is a machine getting clogged and then spitting out a cloud of dust. It's for a cartoony game. It's got a cartoony sound. I'm going to talk a little bit as it goes just to describe what happens. I'm just going to go through layer by layer and talk about what the sound is. and what it's used for. So the first one's just going to be my voice, just me coughing. It's me coughing 3 times, barely any processing. Me blowing into the mic yet again. That is just a factory loop that I had in the library. Another factory loop that was already in the game that I did some pitch shifting on. And this is just a cool synth siren that I had lying around. And here's it all together. It's a real simple sound. There's very little processing on it, but the effect is this sort of cartoony, like, this spitting out this cloud of smoke. It works really well in game, and there's nothing there that I did that you guys wouldn't know how to do. Literally for a couple of them, I had graphs that basically just chart like the pitch rises, then the pitch falls. The volume rises, then the volume falls. There's really nothing complicated. You don't need to go to school to learn how to do that. It's also not that complicated. Yeah.
For the factory sounds, was it like a paid thing or?
Yeah. One of the sounds was something that one of the factory sounds was from a free library that I found. Okay. It was literally just like I was browsing around. I had already had it on my computer. It was like a bunch of, I mostly had it because I needed a bunch of sounds of like metal being hit. But that loop was in there. It was royalty free, totally free to use. And then the other one, I don't know where he got it, but the developer of the game already had it in game. You know, it was basically like it was a temporary sound that became permanent. The next one, this is from the same game. This is from the game Smile for Me. It's a first-person point-and-click adventure is the tagline. Here I have the actual animation that I'm trying to score. This is the get item sound. It is totally abstract. When I get items, you don't hear anything, but you know, this is a thing that we expect ever since, I mean, getting coins in Mario or like Zelda opening a chest, right? We all know that sound. We need to have a sound because it like reinforces the, oh, we got a thing, yes, good. This is a creepy game, it's cartoony, it's sort of unsettling all the way through, so I wanted to, you know, I wanted it to be unsettling. This is gonna sync up with, I'm gonna go layer by layer again, and it's gonna sync up with the animation. Chime with a delay. MIDI snare. Siren. That one is literally just some processing on me saying "buh." I call it Rugrats. It's basically just a Rugrat sound. It's like it's straight Mark Mothersbaugh, totally stolen. This next one, just a regular crash cymbal. And the last one is a bunch of recordings of my voice. Sounds stupid. Sounds stupid. I don't know why there would be a voice there, but again, this is abstract, right? The whole point of this was I wanted to make like the iconic sound for the game, the sound that you would come to mind when you play the game, and it needed to have like an element of like joy, of unsettlingness, and something that's like personal, and almost everything has a bit of vinyl processing on it, like just like a little bit of pitch, warble, condensed frequencies, saturation, that's like a little bit of clipping and crunch, to give it this old-timey, sort of like dated, vintage, weird, not quite right feel to it. And here's the whole sound all together. So not quite the Zelda sound, right? I mean, this is not pure joy. This is like, okay, we did it. We did it. You know, but that's what the game needed. Again, there's very little there that, I guess the specific vinyl emulator plugins that I used were paid, but other than that, I mean, mostly just my mouth and really crappy snare. The snare sounds were triggered by MIDI, but it was stuff that I recorded myself. That's really it. This last sound I'm going to show for you now is, this is for a pirate-themed game. This is a game that I'm still working on. This is the sound you hear. It's sort of a retro nostalgic party game. This is the sound you hear when your boat sails into spooky waters. It's like ghostly. I think the advice that I was given for this is like make something, just make a spooky sound. That was it. That was the only advice that I was given no references. Just make something spooky. Any guesses on what this is going to contain?
Some squeaky metal.
There is absolutely squeaky metal. Good guess.
Something with your mouth.
Yes, great guess. Yeah, there's this one's actually a little bit. Richard, can I turn the volume down on this a little bit? That starts off. Well, it's just going to be a little loud at first. We're going to be okay with that. Yeah, that's basically the only two elements here. Squeaky metal and my mouth and someone else's mouth. This time I'm going to play it layer by layer, but each time I'm going to play the layer unprocessed, so like no plugins on it, and then with the processing. And some of them, I had this on looping because I'm an idiot, so some of them you'll hear a couple times. Oh God, sorry. You know what that is. Just pitch and reverb and EQ, basically. Squeaky metal, there we go, had to happen. Again, just EQ and reverb on that. Yeah. That's me. My voice hurt a lot from recording a pirate game. Again, basically just EQ and reverb. That one I found online for free. A little spooky. Oh yeah, that's just a thud. That's literally just a bass drum. Give it some reverb, it's all sort of floaty. This sounds horrible on these speakers, but it's just like a low rumble. Ooh. Ooh. All me, I'm embarrassed to say. Sorry. Didn't mean to repeat it 3 times, believe it or not. Again, you know, I used some paid plugins there, right? Like I used certain reverbs that I like and certain pitch stuff that I like. But this is mostly stock plugins, and even if I didn't use the specific plugins I could use, every DAW that you can get for free has all that same stuff anyway. There was not a single paid sound in there. It was, like I said, mostly me. Oh, this one here, this one I got for free, but you know, it's still, honestly, I could have taken a metal bowl, filled it with water, and put like a violin bow to it, but I didn't feel like doing that. So I just had it lying around and figured I'd just like drag and drop it in. You would never like recognize it, be like, hey, wait, isn't that like water and metal number 3 dot wave from Ghost Hacks, whatever? No, you'd never notice that because of layers, because of simple processing, because of all I'm doing is adding things on top of each other until I'm getting the effect that I need. And if I need to subtract from there, you can subtract from there. Okay. Any questions thus far? Any questions about those? I picked very silly sounds apparently, but and again, I will show you my Reaper project so you can get a sense for like what these would actually look like in the process. So here's how we put the pieces together. Please stop me if I get boring here. Last year when I was here, I started talking for like a half hour about like loudness and volume and really boring stuff. So just catch me if I'm boring you. Not a joke. Said it before, I'll say it again. Sound is only as good as the last step in the chain. If anything goes wrong between rendering your file and it playing back on the player's game, you failed, right? You have not succeeded. If anything goes wrong, if you did stupid implementation, if it's way too loud, if it's way too quiet, if it stutters, if there's, you know, there's so many things that can go wrong. So that's why every step of this implementation is crucial. Balance is key. What do I mean by that? Let's go back to that example of, let's say you're playing a sort of like a Doom clone, like a retro FPS, super fast pace, and you got that like real cheesy 90s MIDI metal playing in the background, and it's real bass heavy, and you have a shotgun blast, and it's realistic, so it's super low and super loud. What's gonna be the problem there? Well, everything's loud, and if the music is bass heavy, and if the shotgun's bass heavy, then they're competing for the same space, right? There's only so much we can hear if it's all cluttered into like between 50 and 400 hertz. So how can we fix that? Well, there's two ways. I mean, we can do something tricky with implementation. We can apply a compressor to the bass side of things in the music, or we can do the easier option, which is just add some high frequencies to the shotgun. Make it a different sort of shotgun. Give it a really fast sort of crunchy click with a lot of distortion. Believe it or not, most of the time when you're adding distortion, what you're really doing is you're amplifying higher frequencies, in addition to a bunch of other stuff. But my main point here is, no matter how good your sounds are, if they're not gelling with each other, it's going to sound like a garbledy mess. Variance. If you hear the same sound over and over exactly the same way, it's going to start sounding weird. In linguistics, this is called the McGurk effect. I think, am I wrong about that? I think that's what it's called. Anyway, you will start to get fatigued with the sound if you just hear it over and over. It'll start sounding weird to you. The easiest way to do that is by making slight variations of the sound. One way you can do that is literally just tweak the parameters in your DAW. So like this time, like this layer is a little bit louder and it's like slided a little to the left, and you just literally make them slightly different. But there are cheekier ways to do it too. The most common is to just slightly vary the playback speed every time the sound is triggered. If you've ever played Stardew Valley, one of the best, like most satisfying moments from a game feel perspective is when you pick up the crops, like when you harvest the crops that you've been growing for a while. What you do is you click on a crop and then it just spits, it's like a pole with a bunch of beans on it. Then it spits out a bunch of beans and you walk through the beans, and every time you walk through a bean, you get like a sound like that. I'm 90% sure it's exactly one very tiny MP3 file, but the playback speed is just a little bit different. So it goes boop, 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 because it changes the pitch when it varies in the playback speed. And that just gives you this satisfying thing of like, oh my God, I'm getting so many different sorts of eggplants right now. And it's just like, it's so satisfying. And it's a solo dev, so this is relatable. I bet he just has a mic and he did that and like got it on one take, dragged and dropped it in, varied the playback speed, and it's just perfect. It is like ideal game feel. But yeah, a lot of times if you hear sound over and over, you just need some slight variance, and it can be a real pain in the ass, but it's something you got to do. I mentioned this before, but you got to think about music, right? In the shotgun example, if the music were different, the sound could have been different. If there's no music in a section, do the sounds get louder because they need to fill up more space, or do they get quieter because they're not competing against anything? There are a lot of sort of like mixed considerations that you need to take into account when you are both recording the sounds and implementing them. In-engine processing, yeah. Even in Unity, there are some pretty bare bones options you have to determine what happens to sounds. I haven't played with this too much because normally when I do engine stuff, it's with Fmod, but at the very least, you can do stuff like set priority so that it doesn't trigger like 100 sounds at the same time. It triggers the 12 that are most important at any given time. This does stuff like it. I don't need to talk to you guys about that. That's your area of expertise, but there is a lot that can happen in engine. The most important is maybe just slapping a limiter on everything. A limiter is basically a piece of processing that makes sure the sound never goes over 0 decibels. Any sound that goes over 0 decibels is going to cause some sort of distortion. It's going to cause your speakers to get all like crunchy. and it's going to sound bad in all contexts. A limiter is basically just a thing that makes sure the volume stays at a level that is acceptable. There's just no way to do that ahead of time, right? Because games are interactive. You don't know when sounds will trigger. You don't know if the player is going to somehow throw 10 grenades all at once that will all explode all at once. If that happens and you have all the sounds piled on top of each other, it's going to cause problems unless you have some in-engine processing to make sure that it doesn't. Middleware, again, this is stuff like Fmod and Wise. It's something that you need to consider using. I think it's very often not necessary and causes a headache. I mean, for simple games, it can be more difficult to try to integrate that stuff than to just like figure out how to use the tools in your engine. But it's a godsend when you need it. And this gets really complicated. The further you go, there's sort of just no end to the things that you can consider as you're going through implementation. This, of course, is the audio source component from Unity. It has caused many headaches for developers who don't know anything about sound going in and think it will be the same as any other asset. In a lot of ways it is, and in a lot of ways it isn't. So now is the time for questions, or I can take you into some Reaper projects and show you specifically how I actually go through and edit some sounds. Do you have any questions before we move on? No? Yeah.
What's your favorite way to record a sound?
My favorite way to record a sound is you're basically asking for a cheeky answer, so I'm going to have to give you one. It's to do something that I have planned, right? There's so many times where I'm just like sitting in my studio being like, I don't know, let me start by just verbalizing into the mic for a while, and that is so frustrating. But when I can go in being like, oh, I just realized there's a way that I could do that. That would be clever. That's my favorite way to record a sound. There was a sound for the game Smile for me that I was struggling a lot with. It's basically a really cartoony animation of a golf ball very slowly moving through a pipe. And as it does, it like makes the pipe expand where it's rolling out of, and then it shoots out of the end of it. It's like, it's so cartoony, and it had to have something really goofy. I started off with like a bunch of like, we have a broken trombone in our house, and I tried just like playing a bunch of stupid sounds to be like, bonk and bonk. But it was like a really steady movement, so that didn't make sense. And I just saved it for last, basically, because I sent a couple versions that didn't work to the developer. And then I realized like the thing that I need is the swirling of the ball to make it seem like it's moving fast, even though it's moving like painfully slow. I took a lacrosse ball, I wrapped it in tin foil, and then I put it in a wok. And then I kind of and I put that to the mic. There's basically no processing on it. I mean, I added reverb on it to make it sound like the ball is in a tube in addition to being spiraling around. But like that moment where I realized like there is like a practical solution to get this sound that is both accurate and like stylized at the same time. Like, ooh, that's chef kiss right there. It's perfect, right? It's like the moment when you realize, oh, there is a solution. I mean, beyond that, I like breaking things. I mean, every time I get to like break beer bottles with a hammer and record, that's always fun. I mean, that's just an easy answer. It's awful because there's sort of a limit to how many things in your house you can break before like that just becomes a problem. And you know, if you're like, oh, my mic wasn't plugged in, crap, you know, that's bad because then you already broke the thing. But anything else? Yeah.
How do you give a sense of space using sound as in, let's say if I want to show like how, like, so basically I'm doing an audio only game.
Mm-hmm.
So in that,
Well, audio only?
yeah.
Cool, okay.
So in that, how do you give a sense of like how far something is using sound, like just like spatial sound? So.
Yeah, so sound diffuses differently depending on how far you are from an object. I mean, that's like obvious, but like when I clap here, it takes longer for the sound to bounce off that wall and get back to me than when I'm here, right? I'm also able to retain more high frequency sounds when I'm closer to the wall because high frequency sounds diffuse faster than low frequency sounds. It's sort of like how like the sky's blue because red light diffuses more quickly. It's or whatever the heck that's about. I'm not a light designer. So there are like very obvious physical ways that you can represent that mimic real life. And if you're using a reverb plugin, there's just like a size parameter that mimics the early reflections of sound. Usually reverbs are based on like a combination of early reflections and the trail, basically. Like there's a lot of like really quick bounces that happen all at once, and it doesn't sound like click, 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 because it's so fast. It's just coming like quick. But then there's also like the sound still staying in the space, and that is more diffuse. You can literally just automate, if you're doing in-engine processing or something like that, or if you have like a bunch of different sounds that are triggering all at once, the closer you are to the object that you are facing, just make it so that the reverb is lower. It won't be real, because in a real space, as I get closer to that wall, I get farther from that wall, right? But there's always some sense of directionality in games that doesn't always like work in the real world. That's my first instinct. If you're relying on sound alone, you might have to fake a lot of stuff, right? You might have to make things like artificially way louder than they would be, just to create a sense of like, if I have something that is making noise, basically you need things that are making noises in different places, right? Unless your footsteps are like really perfect and you have some way of modeling how they're going to bounce back at you. I need a telephone over there whose volume changes depending on my distance from it. I need a cat screaming over there, and I basically need to be able to like triangulate my space. If you are talking more generally about how do you create like the general notion of space without like specific things and how they would like physically interact, it can be very abstract, right? I had to do a bunch of ambiences for a visual novel recently. And a lot of the ambiences, like the rooms that I had to create the ambiences for, it was like, this is an office, it's at night, there wouldn't be any people around, all the lights are off, there would be no birds, it's not near a road. And I'm like, okay, so nothing in this scene is making any noise? Do you want me to send you like a blank MP3? Obviously he didn't, right? Because he didn't want the realistic noises you would be hearing there. What he wanted was a bed of sound that gave the impression of being there in an abstract way. And because it's abstract, I can't tell you the correct way to do it. I can tell you how I did it, which is like really low filtered noise, like literally just like white noise that has like a bunch of filters on it, some EQ automating so that there are peaks and troughs that are moving around just to give the sense of it being like a real space. And I think maybe I just like stood in the background and like hummed like really far away from my mic just to create this sort of diffuse, like, it's atmosphere more than it's ambience. It's not real, it's giving you the sense of the mood of the space without the realism of here's how this space would sound. That sounds really hard. Good luck to you. I'm curious how you do it. It will require some combination though of here's realistically just like what happens to sound in different places, and I'm not the person to talk to you about that. So I'm not in the business of creating perfectly realistic sounds, really. I mean, very few people in audio design are. It's more about evoking the sound that you're trying to represent. It's gonna be some combination of the realism part, which, I mean, you should just look up the physics of sound. I don't have any like go-to spots that I go to for that. Some combination of that and being creative with evoking that. I said sort of the same thing over and over there, but does that sort of answer your question? Okay. And if you have something more specific about that, I'm sticking around for a while, so feel free to ask me after. Any other questions before?
What is that cheap mic that you use? That blue one that was.
Oh, the blue one. It is the like musician's friend brand mic. It's like a MXL 970. It's not good. I wouldn't recommend it. I got it on sale for $150. It's normally $400. It's the only reason I bought it. It's not a great mic. There are better things for the price point at its original price, but because I got it on a good sale, it was still a good deal. It's better than anything else I would have gotten for $150. It's bad though. It broke almost immediately, but it's still functional. Anything else?
I'm just surprised it was $400.
Normally?
Yeah.
Is that high or low?
It sounds like mind-bogglingly high.
Yeah, I mean, condenser mics are just always expensive. It sucks. If you want. Okay.
They were both like $400 and they're incredibly amazing.
Right. So I mean, this is worth more than $150. considerably more than $150. I wouldn't say it's worth $400. I don't know. We could agonize over this stuff forever. Yeah, I don't like it.
Also to just kind of prove the point that like you don't have to spend a lot of money.
No. Oh no. I mean, $150 on a microphone. Yeah, great, cool. I mean, that's for a good microphone. That's a win, and it's still a good microphone. It's just not as good as $400 good. Should we look at some projects? Like see the meat and potatoes here? I can close out of that. And that. Cool. So Reaper just uploaded to 6.0. I don't know how the UI works anymore, so bear with me as I figure it out. I also never use a laptop. I do absolutely everything on my desktop. This isn't my computer. I am going to show you a few sounds from that pirate game that I was working on, just because it's the thing that's in most recent memory. First, I'm going to play you the sound of two dueling pirates unsheathing their swords simultaneously. It's real simple. It's not very full-bodied because there's a lot of other sounds going on at the same time. This is high seas combat. It's layered in with a bunch of other stuff, and it's also sort of a cartoony game. I hope I don't look like the person that just like has a bunch of swords at their house. So I didn't use swords for this. Any ideas what I did use? Oh, it's in the, you can see the titles, so I use knives, yeah. The thing is, knives are really small, and generally speaking, small things vibrating make higher pitches than big things vibrating. So I had to time stretch them to make them seem like they were bigger knives. But literally all I did was it was two combination, it was like a knife on a bowl and then like a different knife on a different bowl. The bowl was like basically playing the role of scabbard in the simulation that I'm doing. So we'll play knife 1 first. That's it as it is now. The only EQing I have is a little bit of oomph, a little bit of presence, and then just shaping out the stuff I don't like. And here is it, here is it at, don't worry about all this, the Reaper UI is insane if you don't know it, but here's it played back at normal speed. I really just made this one a little bit longer because it was too high pitched where it was before. That's just a little too much for me. And that's just preference. I could have probably gone with that and the dev would have been fine, but I just liked it a little bit lower. Control Z. Here's the next one. This one is very different. You could hear that there's something catching there. There's like a little bit of I don't even remember what it was. I think it was on like a bottle opener or something. But this one is actually pitched down a lot. So here's the original version. Thank you. Way too high, right? And it doesn't, the thing is when you time stretch, you have two effects. It's pitch and length of the sound. That just doesn't resonate long enough to my taste, right? So once we lengthen it out again, all right, yeah, that's swordy. And it doesn't sound like a real sword, I think. I think real swords coming out of scabbards basically make no sound. But, you know, we have this conception that it's always a shing, right? So we needed shings. This one I have a slightly more processing. I have saturation. That's basically just you're pumping this through something that's going to clip the sound a little bit, add some higher harmonics. This is basically once I made it low by stretching it out, I lost a lot of the high frequencies. This artificially creates some high frequencies. And then when I EQ'd it, there was just something that rings out a little too low. You can still see it here. You can see that little yellow spike. I don't even know what that was, but something was ringing a little too loud, so I had to take that out, and then I compensated on either side. Again, easy stuff. Every DAW that you use is going to have saturation built in. It's always going to have time stretching and EQ, so nothing here that you can't do on your own. And finally, there's so many times where you'll make a sound, you'll do like the obvious stuff, like here's like the most obvious representational audio that I can have, but you still need some extra just to like, one, make it unique, and two, to like give it that game feel, right? It's not just about like, here's realistically what it would sound like. If we made all games sound realistic, they would sound insane and really boring most of the time, or really cluttered. So this one, here's a cymbal sound that's been reversed and added some reverb and some pitch and compression and a bunch of stuff all in a row, but nothing that you wouldn't have. Here's it with no processing at its original speed, it's going to be basically unrecognizable. But if you do this long enough, you start to know what sounds you want. That's that from every EDM track ever. Right before the drop, you hear like this cymbal in reverse, just rising up. I knew I wanted just that slightly like anticipatory thing, and it also is metal, and we want to evoke the sounds of metal when we're dealing with swords, right? So here's it with processing and back to normal. Really subtle. I mean, you wouldn't even notice it in the context. The point that I'm trying to make with this here is nothing that I did was hard, right? Nothing about sound design is hard. It's all just about like instincts, right? It's all about knowing, here are the effects that I want. I need the sound of metal. I need it slightly cartoony. I want it to be slightly realistic. I want it to create that anticipatory moment right before the swords are drawn. I want it to last a little bit because I want it to resonate so that it feels like momentous. A bunch of little things, but none of it required a ton of technical know-how to figure out how to do that. I mean, this might look like a lot to you if you've never used a DAW before, but all in all, this is like comparatively simple stuff. And I don't mean that in like a discouraging way, just in if you spent a little bit of time with the DAW, you'd know how to do everything that I've done here. Okay, any questions on that one? That's a fun one. It's boring. I mean, it's really just it's a really simple sound, but it does exactly what I want it to, and the devs were happy with it as well. Is something soloed right now? No, I don't understand this new UI. Okay.
Question for you. Do you normally work in one timeline?
Oh, I'm a mess. I didn't say this before, but the most important thing with sound design is organization, and I'm awful at it. Usually I try to split up. For sound design, I try to put different projects that are related sounds into the same project so that I can bounce between them and edit sort of in tandem. So for Duel on Board, which is the game that this is for, I had a lot of the like ship-related sounds all in one thing. I had all the UI sounds in one thing. I had all the environmental sounds in one project. And the limits are like, I don't have a great computer. I built it myself. It's got like a 10-year-old motherboard. It does the trick though. Like I said, I have a job and I have a 10-year-old motherboard. There are just like practical limitations on how big projects can be. So you do have to split it up a little bit and like literally just like load times. If I want to be able to switch between sounds quickly, separating them into slightly smaller projects is often worth the annoyance of having a lot of smaller projects. It's give and take. Okay, so here's a cannonball. The track is called Cannonball Explosion, but this is really the cannonball hitting the ship, not the explosion of firing it. They called it Cannonball Explode. That's a bad name for it. If they watch, I'm very sorry, Richard. Okay, here's the sound. So this is a cannonball smashing into a ship. You'll notice this one has a lot of different layers. Again, these are mostly pretty simple, and I believe almost all of these were free sounds that I got from libraries or stuff that I recorded myself. So, do we like this, going through piece by piece and hearing how these are made? Yeah, okay. Here is a sound called, I guess, Big Thunder. So you see this red line here. That's a fade in and a fade out. I didn't want the thunder to play immediately because this is like, I was talking about explosions before. The first thing I want you to hear is just that big old thud of the impact right away. Here, because you are very close to the explosion, there really isn't that much of a pause between initial impact and the rest of the debris falling and whatnot. So what is this? That's not really an explosion sound, right? Like, I don't even remember what this one originally sounds like. Let's see. Oh, it's literally just a recording from a rainstorm that I had. That's funny. I should have checked that ahead of time. But you add literally just pitch. So this is a stock Reaper plugin. All I've done is dropped the pitch a little bit. I have given it a lot of bass and taken out the frequencies that I don't like. And I've clipped it again. That's just reintroducing some of the high frequencies after I drop the pitch. That, and then I automate the EQ so that the high band goes up and then it goes down. When it all is together, it's it gives you that sort of like crunch and like the trail a little bit of the explosion. Is it 5 yet? No, almost. If anyone needs to go, you just go. You can just walk past. It's fine. I'll wave goodbye. This one's called Trees Fall. I know what this sound is. It's annoying. I use it for everything. It's trees falling. It's pretty loud. It just has a lot of crackle. I've used it in like 4 different games I've scored. I just needed some high. These are the planks on the boat cracking, basically. That was the idea that I had for what this represents. Of course, when everything's together, nothing needs to represent things one-to-one, but when you start to compile a sound based off a bunch of different layers, it's often useful to think in terms of like the components of what the sound is made up of, right? And I'll talk about that as I keep going. This one's called Metal Door Slam. It's what it sounds like. I'll play it back at the original pitch with no processing. Again, as with a lot of things, this was time stretched. This is a great sound. A lot of annoying high frequencies, just a lot of bad stuff in it. I think it's very ugly, but it's got something nice about it, I guess. Here's it with processing. That's just more wood, really. That's more wood cracking. That's the mast falling apart or something, but sort of what it gets for me. Here's where we start getting into some of the impacty stuff, like the moment the cannon hits and you just need like a wash of sound. This, you can read it right here, it's a gavel. I mean, it's a recording I have of a gavel. It sounds pretty bland here, but when combined with everything else, and if these speakers weren't whatever this is, would sound great, trust me. Again, that's more impacty stuff. Here is a folder of a couple tracks called Impacts. Again, this is literally a guy punching a punching bag. The sounds that I had with a little bit of reverb on them and nothing else. And then here's sort of like the low frequencies. Some of the low frequencies. I didn't want this that low because it's competing with thunder and the music, and it's a cartoony game. And then here is that sort of like the debris falling into the water. It's really soft, it's really subtle, but it's doing everything I need it to do. This is actually just a constant sound of rain falling, but if you automate it, or if you just add in a fade in and a fade out like this, that's what it sounds like normal. You just do a little bit of automation on it. It sounds like, oh, there's a lot of water that gets splashed up, and then it falls, and then most of it is fallen, and then almost all of it is fallen. It gives you that. It's what water sounds like when like a splash happens, right? So here's everything all together again. It's, again, only stock plugins, sounds that are easy to find, free to use. This is one of those ones that would have been hard for me to do by recording my voice. Originally there was just a which just added some frequencies that I needed. You will see that, well, I'll show you the next one because the next one is almost exclusively my voice. This is a pirate very voraciously drinking an entire mug of beer. I originally had a recording of me voraciously drinking a mug. I just did it exactly. I was like, let's see where we can get with this. And it was, I got real close to my mic and I made sure I did every glug glug with my mouth that I could. And it was very realistic, and it was difficult to listen to. It was disgusting. I mean, if you've ever put your ear to someone's throat while they drink, it was that. It was awful. It sounded great. I mean, I was like pretty happy with how I produced it in terms of like getting a realistic sound. And it's like evidence that like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, you know? This one's still kind of gross, honestly.
You didn't send that one, did you?
I did, and they asked me to reconsider. There are elements of that have stayed into this current version. I mean, you can see based off these. It's not great. If you guys don't want me to play this one, like just tell me to stop at any point if it's just gross. The first element is the cartooniest element, and this is what saves everything. This is one single recording of me going glug and pitching it gradually up each one. It's a cartoony game. Like, it's got Animal Crossing voice that I also got to record. Right? This one's just, you know, it's got EQ. I wanted this as basically any of the when you go, there's a moment where there's high frequency at the start of that impact, and I wanted to boost that a little bit, but I didn't want to get any of the gross like lip noises. That's what this drop here, and I need some body in it because it's nice and low. I pitch it down, of course, because when I glug, it's not quite that low. And compression, just make sure that the volume stays not as peaky. I don't want it going glug, glug, glug. The compression basically keeps the volume within a reasonable range. Stupid, right? It's stupid. Can I turn this up a little bit? Is that okay? Is that doing? There we go. There we go. Cool. Perfect. Okay, that's plenty. The next one is, okay. I want you guys to tell me what liquid I'm pouring here. Sorry, let me do it without processing. Is that water? To me, that's very obviously a carbonated beverage. There's something about the way that you pour into something that has foam in it that is unique from water because you don't get as many as the water bubbles splashing. Now, this is weird. Why is there a sound of pouring a drink as the person is drinking it? That's not how that's not how that works. But again, this is not realistic. We're trying to evoke the feeling of consumption of beer, right? So I layered it in. I added some processing, so it's mostly just no high end at all. This is a low pass filter. Nothing gets past it basically towards a certain point. It basically rolls off any high frequencies. Here's with the processing on. This is the feeling of beer going down your throat, right? Or that's how I'm thinking of it. You might think of it any other way, but that was what I had in mind when I'm doing it. This one's fun. Let's do no processing first. It's this. Got real close to the mic and did this. Why? I don't know. I just wanted throat noises. I wanted to evoke throat, and that is the sound that does throat for me. You can barely hear it in the final thing. Sorry. When you layer it in with each glug, it sort of like syncs up to the glugs. It just gives it more impact with each individual glug, and it reinforces the idea that we're talking throat here, right? Like that's where this is happening. Okay, this one's the gross one. Just saying ahead of time. You'll see here, this is the processing. There's no processing on this. All I've done is pitch this down like a lot. And God forbid, when I stretch this back to its normal length, it's going to be real gross. That's it normally? Let's turn that up. That's great. That's some good stuff right there. Here is it normally. I'm so sorry, but you have to know what this is like.
Nope.
I don't even remember specific. I was trying to. I was like looking at this the other day. I can't remember exactly how I did. I can't remember. It was like. So I think it was something like that. And again, you know what this is. That's not what you do when you drink beer, but you're creating that impression, right? You're like, you guys want to hear that again?
Hey, I drink beer.
It's awful. I feel so sorry. Okay, I promise that's the last time. But once it's shorter, once it's got the processing, once it fades down, right? This is just sort of more of just like your tongue's involved, your lips are involved. You're a pirate. You're drinking like crazy, right? And lastly, this one might be the least sensical one. That's just that. You don't do that while you're sipping, and once you add the processing and so processing back on, I don't think there's much. It's just mostly it's pitched down a lot, and the EQ is like all low end. This is a big hearty inhale, right? Sorry, you see what I mean? I processed it so that it is down one octave. It is basically like it is 1/2 the frequency that it would be otherwise, and then I cut out all the high frequencies and added a bunch of low. This is just a big girthy inhalation. You can barely hear it. That pitch also is modulated, so it gradually goes down even further than that 1 octave. You see, that's what this line is. When I play you the whole sound, you won't hear it, but it's there, and it gives you that impression of liquid going down, of you inhaling. Yeah.
We're gonna get all lip smackied and turn it back down.
I did. Well, you can just barely hear the lip smacking, you can just barely hear that inhalation, but the net effect is cartoony pirate. I mean, I think maybe you guys have critiques. Maybe you think all these sounds are bad. I don't know. My clients are happy with them, so I'm happy with them, of course. But that's it. You know, it's a mixture of instinct about like what parts of this sound do I need, what parts of it need to be realistic, what parts can be realistic feasibly. Like I don't have a cannon to shoot. I can't do that realistically. What I can do is like steal the sound of a tree falling, steal the sound of a door slamming, steal, create a bunch of just like low rumbly sounds to add to that. I have a sound of like just like water boiling. Automate that. There's so many things that you can do that are very simple that can create the net effect that you want, because every one of these sounds stupid if you solo each individual layer. Luckily, no one aside from you four and everyone in Purdue, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, they're the only ones who are going to hear these soloed out, right? It's sort of like you don't want to know how your sausage is made, right? This is, I mean, if you knew that, I won't play the lick lips again, but if you knew that was, you were hearing that every time your pirate drank beer, you'd be like, I don't ever want that pirate to drink beer ever again, right? But it works. Okay, that's about all I had planned for this. Questions? Anything else with this project? Again, I'm happy that I was able, I use a lot of third-party plugins. Originally, I had a few on this project, but I just swapped them out. I had literally the only ones I had on this project were a fancy limiter that I like better for when sounds get greater than 0 decibels. That can be helpful for when you want really big transients, but don't want to manually make sure that they don't go over 0 decibels. And there's a plate emulation reverb. None of that's important. Basically, just regular reverb is easily replaceable from every reverb is different, but your stock reverb can do most of what you need. Questions? How are we doing on time, Regin? Is this a good time to stop?
Yeah, there's no questions here. There's nothing coming in from the live stream, so.
Lovely. I'm sticking around. I mean, I'm here all night. I am. If you guys have any questions for me, we're doing like a dinnery thing. Yeah?
Yeah, you can also give your email.
Oh, yeah. If anyone wants my card, I can give that out. If you Google me, my name is Will Savino. I have a bazillion Twitter, Gmail, everything comes up. Does anyone want my card? Okay. I feel weird just handing this out. If you want it, it's yours. Thanks for showing up. I hope that was helpful. No idea if it was, but I had fun regardless. Thanks, guys.